I opted to go with something a little bit fun for this. And if you're going to ask when my rap album drops, kudos. So I'm wearing the Seattle tank top. And instead of a Seattle hat, I went with a Cthulhu hat that I have because Cthulhu, Kraken, it's similar enough. So I went through and I picked my players today, and I kept in mind that there's a minimum. And I also said, you know what? I'm not going to take PK Subban. Made that decision. So there's two boards I've made up here. First, we'll look at who I took from each team. So I took a lot of defensemen. We're going to see a lot of guys get traded. There's going to be a lot of players that get taken and traded. Think Mark Mathot with Vegas. Alexei Emelin. Guys who are going to get picked, and then they're going to get moved. Josh Manson makes $4.1 million through 2022. Antti Ranta. I needed 3 goalies, and I thought, you know what? Antti Ranta, he's a UFA next year, but it gives them options. And I'll get into that when I get into their roster. It gives them options, and I like Ranta if he can stay healthy, so I'm like, sure. And I only took 3 goalies. Jeremy Lauzon out of Boston, to me, was kind of a given. $850,000 till 2022. Brandon Montour, $3.85 million. Now, people are going to point out, well, hey, what about the guys that are UFA in 2021, like Montour? A week before the expansion draft, Seattle can sit down with anybody who's not on a protected list and work out an extension. So they can work out extensions with these guys. Sam Bennett, $2.55 million. He's a restricted free agent next year. Brady Shea, $5.25 million till 2024. So already on the blue line, you've got Manson, Lauzon, Montour, Shea. It's not bad. Lucas Wallmark's the one I took from Chicago, $950,000. He's a restricted free agent next year, and I went with Ryan Graves from Colorado. Very good deep blue line in Colorado. $3.16 million. Dean Kukin makes $1.6 million. These guys are both under contract. Jamie Alexiak, I went with out of Dallas, $2.13 million. He's a UFA next year as well. Troy Stetcher, so a lot of defensemen all in a row, as I had expected, $1.7 million through next year. Dominic Cahoon then out of Edmonton, $975,000. He's a restricted free agent next year. Vinny Hinostroza, I went with for $1 million out of Florida. I went with Martin Ferk out of LA, $725,000. Joel Eriksson Ek, $1.487 million out of Mini. And of course, with Mini, I had protected 4 defensemen, 4 forwards. If they go 7, 3, and 1, it's likely that instead it would be Matt Dumba that would be on this board, right? Jake Allen, $4.35 million. I did have them take him out of Montreal. Luke Cunnin is currently a restricted free agent. We don't know what he's going to make. When that's going to expire, we'll see. But I still thought, yeah, he would be the one they take out of Nashville. Dmitry Kulikov was my choice instead of PK Subban, which saved me about $8 million in cap right there, and he's a UFA as well. So they can sit down and negotiate with him beforehand, or they can let him go. Kiefer Bellows, $894,000 restricted free agent next year. Libor Hayek, $833,000. He's a restricted free agent next year. I went with Rudolph Balcers, who's a restricted free agent as well, $735,000. I went with Nicholas Aube-Kubel out of Philadelphia, $1.075 million. He's a restricted free agent in 2022. Teddy Bluger, $750,000 cap hit. He's a restricted free agent next year. Marcus Sorensen, he makes $1.5 million on, at least cap hit is $1.5 million. He's a UFA next year. Zach Sanford, I got out of St. Louis, $1.5 million. He's an RFA next year. Barclay Goudreau, $925,000 cap hit. He's a UFA after next year. Travis Dermott out of Toronto, $874,000. He's a restricted free agent next year. I did go with Braden Holtby out of Vancouver, $4.3 million. His contract is right through 2022. Lucas Johansen was the one I took out of Washington. There were some other options, but I thought, no, Johansen, good young defenseman. This is a young team. I did go with the younger players for the most part. $700,000 restricted free agent next year. And Andrew Kopp out of Winnipeg, $2.28 million restricted free agent next year. So altogether, it adds up to about $58.2 million in salary cap for this coming season. And the minimum is around $48.9 million. So yeah, they have to spend 60% of the cap, and so I did that, and I avoided the big money contracts. So for a lot of the, what about Oshie, and what about, yeah, I'm not taking those contracts because I want to save cap space. those veteran players are not going to be attractive to Seattle. They want to start with younger players, and at least I would think they want to start with younger players and have a good team, but be able to add during the summer. So let's go ahead and look at the other board. So I looked at it and I tried to figure out, okay, so the top 6 forwards, who are they likely going to be? And I thought, well, Bennett should get a shot at it. Cahoon, Hinostroza, Eriksson Ek, Kopp, and Sanford may very well get a shot at the top 6. But remember, at $58.2 million in cap for next season, and even if they re-sign a bunch of guys on this board, they're likely still going to have about $12 million in cap space. That's enough to bring in a top center. That's enough to perhaps solidify. Maybe you bring in a center and a winger. And again, that's likely 12 plus. So they may have $14, $15 million in cap space if they went the route that I went here. Which, with the flat cap that's going to exist for a while, Seattle might be able to bring in a couple of top 6 forwards and bump these guys down to third line time. And then you look on this side, and I'm not saying these guys are less capable than these ones. I was just trying to figure out most likely top 6 and not getting into real technicalities here because we're almost a year out, right, from seeing what's going to happen. Well, we're about 6 months out from seeing what's going to happen. Is that weird? Because the expansion draft should be in June or July, so maybe 7 months at most. So Lucas Wallmark, Teddy Bluger, Martin Ferk, Luke Cunnin, who again we don't know the cap hit for, Kiefer Bellows, Rudolph Balcers, Obe Kubel out of Philly, Sorensen out of Seattle, or out of San Jose to Seattle, and Goudreau out of Tampa. And again, there's a number of UFAs in this top group. You got Hinostroza, all the rest are RFAs, which is fine. They still keep control over them, right? And then the UFAs up front are Sorensen and Goudreau. This is basically a group. I went with a group that they can control their fate. I think it's all right. These are our guys. This is where we're going to go with it. And then on defense, the defense is going to be solid. I've got Manson, Shea, Stetcher, Lauzon, Graves, and Kukan all have contracts extending past this coming season. And Dermott's an RFA. Hayek's a RFA, I should say. Johansen is an RFA, which means the only UFAs in the bunch are Montour, Kulikov, and Alexiak. But out of this group, you've got to think you come up with a pretty decent top 6. And again, during the summer they can add. But you could look at, I'll just again, this is just spitballing because I don't want to get into like, oh, here's the group, because it's going to change between now and when they actually make their picks. Manson, Shea, Montour, Stetcher, Graves, and I'll say Lauzon. That would, I think, be your top 6. And then anybody I didn't just mention, you can look at trading them. You can look at trading them. You can maybe Dermott's the number 6 guy. And if you lose a guy or two to UFA status, that's fine too. If you lose guys as unrestricted free agents, that's fine too. It's not a fantastic top 6, but it's a good one. And so this is where Seattle will be made or broken. And of course in that you've got Holtby, Allen, and Ranta. And again, if they manage to come to an extension agreement with Ranta, then they're in a position where they can trade one of their 3 goalies. Maybe Jake Allen ends up back in St. Louis. Maybe Braden Holtby ends up back in Washington after a year of Lundqvist. Maybe that's where we end up. I don't know. I do know that it's going to be interesting. And there are some names that are not on the board that people might expect. So I put them over here. Washington State-born players currently in the NHL. TJ Oshie is Washington-born. That being said, his contract runs through 2025. I believe he's 39 when that expires. Has almost a $6 million cap hit. To me, Johansen was a better pick. Honestly, I think Johansen was a better pick just to save your cap space. Because that contract for Oshie does not age well. It's not a great contract the further you get into it. And I remember when he signed it, people said, this is good up front, but long-term this contract isn't going to be great because of the cap hit. And I think that's where we're going to head. Tyler Johnson, people will want to see Tyler Johnson on this roster. It may very well happen, but Seattle may not need Tyler Johnson. And Tyler Johnson's contract, combined with his dropping production, means that, if anything, Seattle would pick him up if he ends up getting bought out. Seattle might end up taking him and whoever has him at that time, because I would think Tampa has to trade him. I would think that Johnson, you see some other team retaining cap on him. So Seattle may end up with Tyler Johnson. That may happen, but they don't necessarily 100% need him. Derek Ryan in Calgary, he's Washington State born as well, according to Quant Hockey. Kyler Yamamoto is unavailable, but he is Washington State born, so I had to put him on the board. And then Dylan Gambrell, who I did not draft in the expansion draft, but he could end up finding his way to Washington as well. I think that it's important when you're building your team and you're bringing in fans to be able to say, hey, look, we got some guys who are local, some guys who are born around here, and come on in and watch them play. It's something I've always wanted Vancouver to be a little more proactive with than what they've necessarily been. It's been hit and miss. There have been times where really good homegrown kid from, I don't know, Burnaby, for instance, ends up somewhere else, and you think, gee, if Vancouver had been, looking at him, and there's times where a guy might play for the Giants, and you think, wow, so Vancouver, no, they passed on him. All right, cool. So that's something that I think Seattle would be wise to play into. The idea of hometown kid does pretty well. It's going to inspire local kids to get into hockey, get on a pair of skates, and go out there and skate around the ice, and help to build the base from which you draft more players into Seattle. So no, I don't think this necessarily is how it's going to end up in the end, but I think you end up with a decent team. Now, does this team compete with what Vegas did their first year? No. There are some players here who could have explosive seasons. Sure. I could see Sam Bennett having a great year with an expansion team. I could see Vinny Hinostroza coming out and being fantastic if he can stay healthy. I could see Andrew Kopp with an expanded role on another team being really good. Or if Roslovic ends up in that spot, Roslovic could be excellent as well. And on the blue line, there's offense, there's defense, there's a lot there to like. And as a Boston fan, I would be upset if Lauzon ended up being the guy who left, but that's very well what may end up happening. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And remember, this isn't to be taken as gospel. It is the culmination of all those draft speculation videos I've been doing, and I thought, well, I have to do a video on who I think ends up getting taken and what the team could look like. And we will do this again before Seattle makes their picks. I don't want to do this again a bunch of times during any kind of regular season or whatever happens between now and then. Because I think that the more times you do fantasy drafts like this, the less meaning they have. So I'm trying to keep them to a minimum. So I only want to do one now before they actually make their picks, like I did with Vegas, and got that almost completely wrong. And it's fun when you get it almost completely wrong. Let me know your thoughts, though. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.